Let me explain something that sounds like science fiction but emerges directly from the mathematics we use to describe reality. The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics says that every quantum measurement causes the universe to split into multiple branches. In some branches, one outcome occurs. In other branches, different outcomes occur. All possibilities that quantum mechanics allows actually happen, just in different parallel universes. Most physicists treat this as an interesting theoretical idea, nothing more. But if it's true, if these parallel universes are real, then it has a disturbing consequence for your own existence, a consequence called quantum immortality. Here's the logic. Imagine you're in a situation where you might die. A car swerves toward you, or you're diagnosed with a serious illness, or you find yourself in any circumstance where death is possible. From an outside perspective, watching all the parallel universes, some versions of you survive, and some versions die. But here's the key insight. You can only experience the branches where you survive. The branches where you die contain no conscious experience of you because you're dead. Your stream of consciousness can only continue in the universes where you remain alive. This means that from your subjective perspective, from the inside of your own experience, you will always find yourself surviving. No matter how many close calls you face, no matter how unlikely your survival becomes, you will always experience the outcome where you lived, because the alternative is not experiencing anything at all. Every version of you that dies simply stops. Their branch of the story ends, but your consciousness, your continuous thread of subjective experience, keeps going in whichever branch remains. And from your point of view, it will seem like you're impossibly lucky, like you keep dodging death against overwhelming odds. You might think this is just playing with words, that it doesn't matter if you survive in some branch if you die in others. But quantum mechanics says all these branches are equally real. There's no preferred branch, no main timeline. Each one is a complete universe with its own version of you experiencing it. So which you is the real you? The answer quantum mechanics gives is all of them. You're not a single entity. You're a multitude of parallel experiences, constantly branching with every quantum event. Now let me tell you why I take this seriously, even though it sounds absurd. The many worlds interpretation was proposed by Hugh Everett in his doctoral thesis in 1957. Most physicists dismissed it as metaphysical speculation, but over the decades it's become increasingly clear that many worlds solves real problems that other interpretations struggle with. The measurement problem in quantum mechanics asks why we only see one outcome when we measure a quantum system, even though the math describes a superposition of all possible outcomes. The Copenhagen interpretation says the wave function collapses when we measure it, but it never explains what measurement is or why collapse happens. Many worlds gives a clean answer. There is no collapse. All outcomes occur. We only see one because our consciousness gets entangled with one particular branch of the universal wave function. The other outcomes happen in parallel branches we can no longer access. This isn't just philosophy. Quantum computers work by exploiting superposition and interference between different computational paths. When we run a quantum algorithm, we're essentially computing along many parallel branches simultaneously. The fact that quantum computers work is evidence that these parallel possibilities are physically real in some sense. But let's go deeper into what quantum immortality actually means for your life. Every moment involves countless quantum events. Particles in your brain undergo quantum processes. Photons interact with your retina. Chemical reactions in your cells involve quantum tunneling. Each of these events potentially causes the universe to branch. Most of these branches are nearly identical. The vast majority of quantum events don't lead to macroscopically different outcomes, but some do. And over time, over years and decades, the branches accumulate differences. In some branches, you made different choices. In some branches, different accidents befell you. In some branches, you died young. In others, you lived to old age. The tree of parallel yous is constantly growing, constantly diversifying. But your subjective experience only follows one path through this tree. You can't experience the branches where you cease to exist. So from the inside, from your own perspective, you will always find yourself on a path that continues. This creates a strange selection effect. The older you get, the more unlikely your survival becomes in the aggregate. Death becomes increasingly probable as you age. In most branches you die at some point, but you can never experience being in one of those branches after your death. So you keep finding yourself in the increasingly rare branches where you're still alive. Does this mean you're literally immortal? That you'll subjectively live forever? Not quite. And here's where the physics gets subtle. Quantum immortality, as I've described it, assumes that consciousness is a discrete either-or thing. You're either conscious or you're not. but real consciousness doesn't work that way. It admits degrees. You can be more conscious or less conscious. Under anesthesia, during sleep, in various altered states, consciousness fades and intensifies. Brain damage doesn't necessarily kill you, but it can diminish consciousness. Dementia doesn't stop your heart, but it erodes the self. Age brings cognitive decline even if it doesn't bring death. So the branches where you survive aren't all equal in terms of your experience quality of consciousness. You might survive, but with severe impairment. You might live, but lose the qualities that make you recognizably yourself. This is where quantum immortality becomes truly disturbing, because if your subjective experience must always continue in some branch, but those branches increasingly involve damaged or diminished consciousness, then what are you actually condemned to experience? The horrifying implication of quantum immortality is this. You don't just keep surviving, you keep surviving in whatever state allows for continuation of experience, no matter how diminished that experience becomes. Imagine you're 90 years old. In most branches you've already died. Heart failure, stroke, cancer, any number of causes. But there are still branches where you survive. Maybe in those branches your heart keeps beating, but your brain is severely damaged. Maybe you survive with advanced dementia, barely aware of your surroundings. From an outside perspective, this seems like a terrible fate, but from your subjective perspective, you can only experience the branches where some form of consciousness continues. So you find yourself there in that diminished state, because the alternative is non-existence, which you cannot experience. This raises a disturbing question. Is there a lower bound to consciousness beyond which quantum immortality stops working? Or does experience continue in increasingly degraded forms indefinitely? I don't know the answer. Nobody does. This is where quantum mechanics meets the hard problem of consciousness, and we don't have the tools yet to resolve it properly. But let me offer you a different perspective that might be less bleak. Quantum immortality assumes a specific model of how consciousness relates to physical states. It assumes your sense of self, your continuity of identity, is tied to the specific pattern of atoms in your brain. But there's reason to question this. The atoms in your body are constantly being replaced. The matter that makes up your cells today is not the same matter that made up your cells 7 years ago. Yet you feel like the same person. Your sense of continuous identity persists despite complete material replacement. This suggests that what you really are is not the matter but the pattern, not the particles but the information. And information in quantum mechanics has strange properties. I've argued for years that consciousness involves quantum processes in the brain, specifically in microtubules within neurons. These structures can maintain quantum coherence and perform quantum computations. If consciousness emerges from quantum processes, then your subjective experience is fundamentally quantum mechanical, and quantum information doesn't behave like classical information. It can be in superposition, it can be entangled across space and time, it obeys conservation laws that prevent it from being destroyed. There's a principle in quantum mechanics called unitarity that says information is never truly lost. When you burn a book, the information in it seems to be destroyed, but quantum mechanically it's actually preserved in the exact arrangement of smoke particles and photons, and heat radiation. The information is scrambled, but not gone. Stephen Hawking and I had a famous debate about whether black holes destroy information. He initially argued they do. I argued they cannot, because it would violate quantum mechanics. Eventually Hawking conceded and agreed that black holes must preserve information even if in highly scrambled form. If information cannot be destroyed in black holes, it cannot be destroyed in death either. The quantum information that constitutes your consciousness, the specific pattern of entanglements and correlations that generates your subjective experience, that information must persist in some form. Now this doesn't mean you survive death in any conventional sense. The pattern that is you gets scrambled, dispersed into the environment, lost in the thermal noise of the universe. But the information itself remains part of the quantum state of reality, and here's where it connects back to quantum immortality in a surprising way. If consciousness is a pattern of quantum information, and if that pattern can exist in superposition across multiple branches, then perhaps what you really are is not any single branch but the entire tree of possibilities. You're not one version of yourself living in one timeline. You're the quantum superposition of all versions across all branches. Most of those versions are unconscious, dead, non-existent in any meaningful sense. But some are alive and conscious, and the measure of your existence is spread across all of them. From this view, quantum immortality isn't about one lucky version of you always surviving. It's about the fact that you as a quantum entity always have some measure of existence in branches where consciousness continues. Your subjective experience samples from this distribution, weighted by quantum amplitudes. This is deeply strange, but it resolves some of the paradoxes. You're not condemned to experience endless decline in a single branch. Instead, your consciousness is fundamentally distributed across the multiverse, and what you experience is determined by where the quantum measure of your awareness is concentrated. Let me bring this back to something concrete you can relate to. Have you ever made a choice and wondered what would have happened if you chose differently? According to many worlds, you did choose differently in another branch. Both versions of you are real. Both are experiencing their consequences. This means regret is a peculiar thing. You regret the choice you made in this branch, but in another branch, another you is grateful they made the opposite choice. The space of all possible yous contains both the mistakes and the corrections. It also means that potential is never wasted. Every talent you could have developed, every path you could have taken, some version of you is exploring it. The mathematician you might have become exists in branches where you made different educational choices. The artist, the parent, the traveler, all these potential selves are real. You are not one person making one journey through one life. You are a vast multiplicity of journeys, a quantum superposition of lives, all equally real, all contributing to the total measure of what you are. And if consciousness is quantum mechanical, if your subjective experience arises from quantum processes, then you're not strictly confined to experiencing just one branch at a time. There might be interference effects, subtle influences from parallel versions, moments when the boundaries between branches become thin. Perhaps déjà vu is an interference effect between nearby branches. Perhaps intuition is quantum information leaking between parallel versions of yourself. Perhaps the sense that you've lived before or that you know things you shouldn't know is your consciousness briefly touching branches where different events occurred. I'm speculating now. We don't have the physics worked out to make definite claims, but quantum mechanics allows these possibilities. The math doesn't forbid them. Here's what I can tell you with confidence. The universe is far stranger than common sense suggests. Quantum mechanics reveals a reality where superposition is fundamental, where possibilities don't collapse into single outcomes but proliferate into parallel branches, where information and consciousness might be woven into the fabric of space-time itself. If many worlds is correct, and increasingly I think it is, then you've already lived countless variations of your life. You've died in some, you've thrived in others. You've made every possible choice and experienced every possible consequence. But you can only be aware of this branch, this moment, this particular path through the quantum multiverse. The others exist, but you cannot directly access them. They're separated from you by the decoherence that makes quantum superpositions appear as definite classical outcomes. Yet they're still you. Still part of the total quantum entity that bears your identity, and in a sense that's deeply comforting. Nothing is truly lost. Every possibility is realized somewhere. The full space of what you could be is actually instantiated across the multiverse. You've already died infinite times in parallel branches, but you've also survived infinite times. You've succeeded and failed, loved and lost, experienced joy and suffering in every possible combination. And right now, in this branch, you're alive and conscious and capable of contemplating this extraordinary reality. That's not luck, that's not chance, that's the fundamental structure of quantum existence. You are quantum immortal not because you can't die, but because death doesn't end the pattern that is you. It only ends one branch. The pattern continues elsewhere, in other forms, in other versions, forever branching, forever exploring the space of possibilities. That's what quantum mechanics tells us about your existence. And once you truly understand it, you realize you're so much more than you thought you were.